It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to this live-streamed event from the beautiful Grand Aula of the University of Oslo. My name is Torunn Tryggestad, and I'm the director of the PRIO Center on Gender, Peace and Security at the Peace Research Institute in Oslo. And I will be your host for the next hour, during which we will discuss the topic Champions of Women, Peace and Security, Norway and Sweden on the UN Security Council. As probably most of you know by now, Norway will join the UN Security Council as of 1st January 2021 as an elected member. And Sweden, they recently served on the council as elected member during the period 2017 to 2018. Both countries are also well known internationally as champions of women, peace and security. So who are more well placed to discuss this topic than the Foreign Minister of Norway, Ine Marie Eriksen Søreide, and Margot Wallström, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden. And on video link, we will bring in Margot Wallström soon from her home in Sweden. A few words about this event before we start. It forms part of the national commemoration here in Norway of the 20th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, which was adopted in October 2000. The co-organizers of this event is FOCUS, Forum for Women and Development, the Center for Gender Research at the University in Oslo, the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the PRIO Center on Gender, Peace and Security. We started out this morning with a panel of 4 ministers and 1 parliamentarian, and civil society representatives discussing Norway's efforts at implementing the Women, Peace and Security agenda at home and abroad. The opening panel was then followed by a panel with scholars and practitioners and activists discussing emerging issues, new voices, and intergenerational and intersectional approach to women, peace and security. For those of you interested in any of these previous panels, or if you want to listen in to this conversation later on, note that there will be recordings available shortly from the PRIO events page. Now, before I give the floor to our 2 prominent guests, I would like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Louise Olsson, senior researcher at PRIO, who will give us a brief introduction to today's topic based on a research project that she has led on the role and impact of elected members of the UN Security Council. Louise, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Torunn. So in early 1999, I got my first job, which was to be a research assistant in a project focusing on gender equality aspects of UN peacekeeping operations. It was funded by the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in Sweden, and it was part of a larger UN project led by the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations in New York. Sweden had at that time just come out of the Security Council and was concerned that the project in the UN was not moving forward. This was a concern that they shared with the UN, and as a consequence, part of the project was actually moved to Uppsala University, where we did a first workshop and research overview that I got to write. Sweden then continued to support the project at the next stage, which took us to Namibia for the signing or the adoption of the Windhoek Declaration. And there, Namibia also decided to take this document to the UN to get it approved as a UN policy on peacekeeping, as they were in the Security Council at this time. In the project, I met Torunn for the first time because Norway was equally concerned with Sweden of the lack of progress in the UN project and was supporting the project with funding, expertise, and material. Norway was just about to enter the Security Council in January 2001, where it was to be among the first to try to promote the integration and use of the resolution that was to be adopted in October 2000 under Namibian leadership, Resolution 1325. Torunn and I then also went on to publish a special issue on gender and peacekeeping in 2001. It therefore feels very fitting to sit here today to present a project funded by the Norwegian Ministry for Foreign Affairs, 20 years later, focusing on how elected members can contribute to mainstream the now 10 resolutions on women, peace and security into the Council core business. In particular, we will draw on the recent Swedish experiences. The project is the Uppsala EMPRIO collaboration, and I've written this project, this presentation together with Angela Mumba-Sällström and Patty Chang, and the project naturally involves Torun and Peter. So let me start by saying a few words about how we study elected members' influence on women, peace and security and the progress in the Council. First of all, what is the UN Security Council? Well, it's the highest decision-making arena internationally, high tempo, high workload, harsh climate. What does the Council produce? Well, two core outcomes are resolutions and statements. And that might not seem very impressive. In addition, these outcomes are produced through negotiations. So here it's important to remember that an elected member constitutes 1 out of 10 elected members. In addition, there are 5 that are in there long term and have a veto, the permanent members. This means that each member, but particularly elected members, will have a limited impact on each issue and problems discussed. Many of these are also stuck in power struggles. But if you manage to suggest and get adopted concrete and action-oriented text in a resolution, then that will have critical effects on the lives of people in conflict areas and on the personnel that the UN deploys around the world. There's always someone on the receiving end of the UN Council's decisions and non-decisions. In the project, we study how an elected member assesses opportunities, strategize, maneuver, and fulfill targets. I will not try to do justice to the intense 2 years that Sweden were in the Council, but I will just give you some examples of what we can learn from how Sweden acted when they were in there. In terms of opportunities, Sweden entered the Council not long after the 15th anniversary. This had created openings and momentums on which to build. There was a need for integration, for better information, for improved participation of civil society briefers. For an elected state, credibility also matters for promoting such progress. So in a sense, there's a need to build on one's own profile. Sweden had a long history of working on gender equality, and with the feminist foreign policy, it was credibly evident to external actors that Sweden intended to promote this profile internationally. In terms of forming an overarching strategy, that is setting aims and deciding on how to work, Sweden decided on promoting the integration of WPS in core outcomes to strive to make WPS core council business. It was considered important to contribute with both positive and possible ways forward, and in particular on including women. In addition, it was clear that it would be necessary to strive to integrate WPS in Sweden's own core work during the entire term, and to work as one unit and to make decisions in the core decision-making structures by the leadership, to live as you preach. In the Council, power hierarchies was indeed present, but presenting language on WPS was often possible, although the climate was harshening. Sweden worked to contribute to amending working methods on WPS by improving information through existing institutions and briefers, but also in one's own statements. One conclusion we draw is that Sweden's strategy was predictably unpredictable. It was known that Sweden would bring up WPS, but it was not predictable what they were going to say, as statements were based on context-relevant aspects of WPS. Sweden also sought to mobilize a network to obtain support and critical information. That is, in as the saying goes, power. So did it work? Well, our data do not permit us to draw causal conclusions. For that, we need longer time series. But what we can say is the overall percentage of resolutions, they did vary, but from the beginning, from the last half of 2017, there was an increase. The category resolution that Sweden also, to a large degree, focused on, mandates of peace operations. These are the most discussed category of resolutions, and they also contain the largest number of references to WPS. So you can say that Sweden's aim of integration does align with the trajectory of WPS, which is a researcher's way of saying, yes, it seems that it worked. What is then the next step as now Norway prepares to enter the Council? Well, in our model, we studied quantity, quality, and priority of language on WPS. And the UN Secretary General has outlined the need to move towards more action-oriented, that is higher quality language in order to ensure impact on the ground, something that the foreign minister also raised at the debate this morning. Because here it does indeed exist a problem. Illustrated by these two graphs, we can see that WPS is still often talked about in very generic or general terms. So there's a need to move towards more action-oriented language. And I very much look forward to seeing what Norway can do about that. So let me therefore end by asking our two panelists one question each. Margot Wallström, could you share with us what you felt was Sweden's space to maneuver in the Council of WPS, particularly if we talk about more challenging contexts such as the Yemen process? And Ine Eriksen Søreide, can you tell us what you see as Norway's main strength on WPS that you bring into the Council? And can you give concrete examples of how you plan to build on that in specific processes? Margot Wallström, I first give the floor to you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, congratulations to Norway and Ine, of course, my former colleague, for managing to get a seat on the Security Council. That is an important job for 2 years, and it's good to be well prepared. I think that this has to do with the issue, how do you measure success? How do you measure efforts, the result of the efforts that you make? And I think it takes proper leadership. I think that we created expectations already by also announcing that we would pursue a feminist foreign policy. And I think that creates a healthy pressure on us to also deliver. And of course, on the Security Council, I think that the room or the space for maneuver, you have to create yourself. We know that it will not be easy with some of the permanent members, the P5 in the Security Council. We know that this is not a given thing. You will have to fight for it, and there will be resistance. And especially since we had also chosen a more provocative way of expressing what we wanted. But they also knew exactly what to expect from us. So we consistently asked the question, where are the women? And I have told this story over and over again, that finally my ambassador, Olof Skog, or our ambassador, Olof Skog, said that in every meeting I'm the one who raised my hand and asks, so where are the women? And in the end, you start to reflect on whether this, what change does this make? And then the whole Security Council traveled to Mali. And when they got to Mali, women came up to Olof and said, thank you very much. Because of that text in the Security Council, for the first time we could meet with the president. We were allowed to have a seat around the table. So it is important. And we focused, of course, to make sure that there were references to the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And in 2017, for the first time, it was in 100% of all the presidential statements, for example. So the issue was placed on the Security Council's agenda. We decided that we would invite women as briefers, so that the information that we achieved also from women would be included in the analysis that the Security Council would then make. We also contributed to make sure that sexual violence was became a listing criterion for sanctions in the UN, and that was an important thing, I would say. Of course, we try to make sure that we also in every country situation and the specific resolutions, also on peacekeeping, that the language on women, peace and security was there, and to make sure that women were represented both as peacekeepers and as briefers and in everything that the Security Council does. So that's how we try to measure whether we were making a process, but very much we had to sort of carve out that space and room for maneuver And when it came to Yemen, just to say that in the end, this is about the specific country situations or the missions that the UN has. And we still see, despite the fact that we now have a common language on women, peace and security, and an analysis and an understanding of the importance of this, when it comes to Libya, Afghanistan, Yemen, where are the women? It's not a given that they are around the table where negotiations or discussions on the future of these countries take place. And there is even a risk of a backlash, for example, in Afghanistan, bringing the Taliban to decision making. So we insisted also, for example, when the Yemeni parties came to Sweden to negotiate, we said, well, you know us, we will insist on seeing also women around the table, and that was extremely difficult. So only one woman in the government delegation, and then they solved that sort of challenge by then creating a special advisory group of women. And of course, they came, I would say, almost most well prepared and contributed. But so there is still a long way before we see women fully represented. Sorry, long answer to your
Very, very good one.
good.
Margot Wallström. Before we give the floor to the Norwegian Foreign Minister, I would like for us to take a few steps back to your feminist foreign policy. And this was launched in 2014 and made headways and a lot of headlines. Can you just remind us a little bit, what exactly is a feminist foreign policy? What are the key traits? Can you reiterate a little bit or remind us a little bit about the feminist foreign policy?
Well, it's the realization that more women means more peace. We know from experience that if women are there to negotiate peace agreements, then they will have more options on the table to discuss, and the peace agreements will last longer. And they are still basically absent in most of the peace negotiations and peace agreements. So more women means more peace. And we also see that there is so much of discrimination against women still around the world. So to me, this belongs to the foreign policy. And that is why we announced that we would pursue a feminist foreign policy in 2014. And of course, we realized that it was could create some controversy, but I must say that passed very, very quickly. I think also if you want to make some kind of mark, you also have to be a little bit courageous, and you have to choose something that makes a difference. And we chose a concept that was different. And then it was a chance to explain that feminism is not something strange. It has a very simple explanation that women and men should enjoy the same rights and obligations and opportunities. And then quickly move into making it a practical policy with practical outcomes. So to me, it was those 3 R's, rights, representation, and resources. So through our embassies around the world, we wanted our diplomats to look at, so do women enjoy and girls enjoy the same rights, legal and human rights? Can they open a bank account, start a business, and not being married away as a child? Can they go to school? All of that. Secondly, are they there in the decision-making context in their countries? And how can we help that? Can they do politics? Can they become leaders and so on? And thirdly, resources. Are there resources enough to meet, and resources directed to meeting also the needs of women and girls? And I must say that an enormous engagement from our diplomats around the world very quickly, and also a lot of interest. And I'm glad to see that a number of countries have more than a handful has by now followed our example. And it means also that you create the expectations, as we've already said. You stick your head out, but I think also this is a good way to get results.
Thank you so much. Now, to you, Foreign Minister Eriksen Søreide, just to remind you of Louise's question. She was wondering, what is it that Norway brings to the Security Council? What are the main strengths, would you say?
Well, first and foremost, I have to say it's so nice to see you, Margot, again. We haven't seen each other for some time now. And I also have to say, again, a warm thank you for the enormous work that Sweden put in for our Security Council candidacy. And we also had the privilege of having one Norwegian diplomat embedded in the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, just to get as much information as possible as to the working methods, especially when it comes to the priorities in the Security Council for Sweden. Not only did Sweden campaign for us, but they also gave us a lot of very valuable insights. And I think that those who have praised what Sweden did in the Security Council has really, it's a very valid point, because I think it stands out even now, a couple of years after Sweden left the Security Council, that what they did were actually giving a lot of headway to some of the topics, and women, peace and security being one of them. So we want to kind of take the torch and work along many of the same lines as Sweden did. I think the work that you have done is also putting additional focus on where we can work and how we can work. I think one of the most important things that we are bringing with us into the Council is more than 30 years of practical experience in this field. You are well aware of much of it. And I think that what this has shown us over time, just as Margot says as well, it has to do with inclusion of women from the beginning to the end of the process. And we've been talking about this earlier on today as well, that it's not enough to include women when you sit around the table. You have to start before the formal processes start. You have to end when the implementation is finished, not when the signing ceremony happens. We also have to make sure that when we look into women's participation, do not make it a sideshow to everything else. It's an integrated part of the peace process. And we also have to talk about what kind of role we give women in these negotiations. It's very easy sometimes, I think, to leave it up to women to deal with the so-called softer issues, not to deal with security, economy, many of the kind of underlying factors of conflict. In addition, we also sometimes see women purely from a victim's perspective, whereas, which I think is wrong. I think that women in many contexts are as much community leaders and civil society leaders as anything else. So we're bringing that practical experience to it. We are bringing the normative work that we do with others, where we focus very much now on not only trying to carve out new normative strategies or putting new norms to this, because we know that this agenda is under a lot of pressure. But what we are focusing on is implementing what we have already agreed on, and there is still a long way to go. And I think that you've seen that in your work as well. And thirdly, I think it is important when we look at this agenda that from Norway's perspective, we have an overarching strategy for women, peace and security. And it's easy to see when you look at our 4 main priorities for our work in the Security Council, where 3 of them are directly linked to women, peace and security. One is peace diplomacy, one is women inclusion and women, peace and security, and the third one is protection of civilians, and especially sexual and gender-based violence. And all of these are interlinked. And that is why I think that in doing so, we can make a stronger push for the different options that we have in the Security Council. And we have learned so much from Sweden and from Margot. And I think it's been really wonderful for us to see what a small country can do when you put your mind to it.
Mm. I would like to ask you the same question as I did to Margot Wallström. We were discussing the Swedish feminist foreign policy, and gender equality and women's rights are also essential traits or characteristics of Norwegian foreign policy. And I've been asked all the time by academics and others, so why don't Norway also label the foreign policy feminist like Sweden has done? Is that a deliberate choice from Norway's side?
Well, to a certain extent, it is, because we do not have the same tradition of labeling policies as I think many other countries have. That doesn't mean that there is a big difference or discrepancy in the way we work, the topics we work with, but it's just not very common that we do it that way. And I think to some extent that has to do with I think that the Norwegian foreign policy tradition is very much, I would say, straightforward and very much just do it in a way. That is not a difference from the Swedish tradition, which is very much the same, but also traditionally and usually using labels, which has a purpose in some senses. For us, it's not been the normal case, so that's why we haven't done it. But we haven't done it with any other topics or fields either. So we are just focusing more on actually executing our foreign policy and making sure that the women, peace and security agenda is right at the heart of everything we do.
I would like to come back to you, Margot, because you gave us a lot of examples of what you did in the Security Council and what you achieved on the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And I'm curious to hear maybe a little bit more, how did you actually do it? What should I say, the diplomatic handicraft? Because I was also involved in the study together with Louise Olson, and many of our interviewees were talking about how impressed they were about the handicraft. So could you maybe tell us a little bit more about that? How did you actually go about doing what you did while you were on the Security Council?
I'm so happy also to see you, Ine. I wish I was there instead, and that we were able to even hug. But I guess we will. It will take some time before we're there, and I wish you all the best also from now on. I want to say first of all that to me it's not a contradiction between announcing a feminist foreign policy and making it very practical, because to me it has always been with the aim of being practical. But of course it is, I can admit to that it is also breaking a kind of tradition that was a Swedish one of not giving it a label, but I thought it was time to give it a label, because I think we need in this time that we are living now, with so much pushback against women's rights, we need to say it very clearly. And I think I know that Norway has such a long experience also from working on this issue, so I think you will do really well. And to mention one more thing that we should not forget, and that is your experience and how we've been working together on the networks of women mediators and negotiators, because this is also where you have a lot of knowledge and experience, and I think this is now spreading, so we have many of these networks around the world, and we will never again have to hear that there are no women mediators or negotiators. The working method was very much to say, let us not be hindered or stopped by the fact that the P5 act in a way that is very counterproductive to our interests, but rather, why not mobilize and engage the elected 10? And also, we decided that we wanted to see a result. From every meeting of the Security Council, we wanted to see a result. And what is a result? Well, it is a decision on a resolution, or it's a presidential statement, or it's just a statement from, that there are different ways for the Security Council to say, this is what we have been discussing, this is the outcome. And also take it sometimes better in a closed session, because then you can negotiate, then you can put pressure on certain members rather than having everything in the public eye. And then it becomes a theater instead, a political theater where some of the big countries just wanted it to make their own show. But to mobilize the elected 10 was one thing. The other was to always have a telephone line open to talk to everybody, not only about them, but with them, about what was on the Security Council's agenda. So it meant more work for our diplomats in the UN, but I think it was very, very effective. And also work with civil society. So to be very open with them and transparent about how we were working, and engage also civil society representatives. But of course it was hard work like you have never experienced for many of our excellent ambassadors and diplomats in New York as well, and for us as political leaders.
The concept feminism or feminist foreign policy is quite controversial in some parts of the world.
But I don't think so much any longer.
Sorry?
I don't think it is so much any longer. I mean, we've had a chance to explain what it stands for. That this is nothing mysterious or dangerous. It's just an idea of the fact that women and men should enjoy the same rights and opportunities and obligations in society. So you just go to the dictionary and look it up, and then every time they ask, you can give them a proper definition. So I think over time it quickly sort of became less contentious or controversial or with a negative connotation. Instead, I saw a lot of curiosity. That when I met with ministers, they would ask, so what is this? What do you mean with this? And we had a chance to explain. And I think what you then need, if you make such an announcement, then you have to have, well, you need clear leadership, of course, but you also need to prioritize, to clearly say that, you know, every year we created an action plan also for the ministry. For example, we said, well, this year we have to do even more on sexual and reproductive health and rights, or economic opportunities, economic empowerment for women, or electoral help to women. And you then need, of course, support with tools and skills development and advice. And also to have focal points at departments and embassies. So you have to create a system that will allow this to live on. Also when a certain person leaves, for example, or you have a shift in government, you can be sure that there is a structure to back this up.
Foreign Minister Eriksen Søreide, the diplomatic practices and methods described by Margot Wallström right now, I guess it sounds familiar to you. At least it sounds a bit familiar to me, the way I know the Norwegian Foreign Ministry. Is this also how you are planning to work when you now join the Security Council? Can you tell us a little bit? How are you now preparing?
Well, I'm really glad that Margot mentioned this, and I would right now actually give you a big virtual hug. That's the only thing I think we can do right now, but it's really good to hear you also, because I think that what is quite special for the Nordic approach in this is that we take a very practical approach to this. We're not too much into the big power rivalry. We don't necessarily have too much to add to that, but we are more practically oriented. And one of the things that we have been doing is we're right now in the middle of a video conference round with all the members of the Security Council before we enter into the Council on 1st of January. We're using our term as observers as best as we can. And we also have the aim, and we still do, continue the dialogue with the countries outside the Council. What I think has been really interesting to see with the Swedish approach is how they have been using the E10 very effectively. And a lot of people tell me that, oh, why do you want to go into the Security Council now? Everything is in a deadlock because China and the US and Russia, they're blocking everything. But that's not the case. And interestingly enough, for small countries like ours, there is a space for maneuver because we can be more creative and use other methods than some of the bigger countries. We can find that little space that makes it possible, like it was for Sweden, to follow up on Luxembourg and others who have been paving some ground for the cross-border resolution on Syria, which is, in my opinion, a very, very good piece of diplomatic handicraft. Even though it is a resolution that still today meets a lot of resistance, is going to be renewed every 6 months and so forth, but the fact that it was possible to actually carve out a resolution, a very practical, result-oriented resolution, in a political landscape where Syria is maybe the most contagious issue on the Security Council's agenda, where Russia has been putting down a veto now, I think 13 or 14 times, even on humanitarian issues. I think that speaks to the working methods that we would like to apply also to the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And there are issues where there is a possibility to use that space in a different way than many other countries can. And the fact that we also have a very good relation to all the P5 countries, I think that is an important part as well. No one sees us or Sweden as a threat, but they see us as someone who are more inclined to think about the results than the political game itself. And that's where I think we can play a role. And I think what Margot says about also the closed sessions is really interesting, because on the outset you would think that a closed session represents something that is not a positive thing. But in the Security Council context, it could be a very positive thing if you combine it, of course, with open debates and combine it with having civil society come brief the Security Council on these issues, having the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights brief the Security Council on a regular basis on these issues. If you can combine it, I think you can actually find that some of the closed sessions can be extremely important as kind of working sessions. Now, of course, the Security Council do not have any physical meetings. It's only digital meetings. I don't know how long that will last. But of course, that puts strains on what is possible to do. But we just have to be creative. And that's, I think, the hallmark of smaller countries, is that we can allow ourselves to use that creativity and to find and actually exploit whatever space for maneuver we can find, however small, however impossible it looks at the outset. And I think that's what makes Sweden and hopefully Norway and other smaller countries effective members of the Security Council.
Well, yes, please.
You know, because I couldn't agree more. And I think we have to explain, when we took office, when we entered the Security Council, the climate and atmosphere in the Security Council was an all-time low almost. And of course, the total failure with Syria and being able to agree on Syria was the most striking example of what it looked like. And I think that what Ines says is that we are good at using the political tool and diplomacy. So we believe in diplomacy and dialogue. And our decision also to make it a priority to have results from every meeting, meaning that in some cases they would reach a resolution even, but in other cases it was just, we at least agreed to say the following. We give the president of the Security Council the role to go out and say, we have today agreed to do this or that. And I think that helped everybody. It lifted the spirits that we were able to agree. And sometimes you have to do it in a closed session, because you need to use the diplomatic pressure to make everybody come on board. And I just think in those days that we live in now, this is such an important thing. We have to believe in diplomacy and using the political tools. And it's always about that small opportunity, that window that opens a little bit, and maybe you can stretch out a hand and make that opening wider and get some results. So I think you're absolutely right. And we are known for that. We are not a threat to anybody, but we can be an opportunity to change things around.
Definitely, Margaret.
Could I just add one
Yes,
thing to it? I'm
please.
sorry.
Yes.
It seems like I'm having Margaret right in front of me, so we're discussing, and that's good. I think that sometimes we also have to admit, as small countries, that we bring something to the council that the council needs. That in our case, we see very clearly that our experience over 30 years of doing peace, reconciliation efforts, the network we have, the way that we work, the fact that we talk to everyone. One example is that during the Afghan process right now, I'm talking to the Afghan government, I'm talking to Khalid Saad, but I'm also talking to the Taliban on women's issues. And for us, that is a natural thing, for Sweden as well. For many other countries, it's impossible. So the fact that we bring knowledge, experience, and a network and a way of working that gives us a lot of, I would say, access that many other countries do not have, is something that the council needs in its work. And that is where also smaller countries can play a role, I think.
I would like to come back to, I mean, the Women, Peace and Security agenda. Already when Resolution 1325 was adopted 20 years back, the agenda was quite broad. And over the 20 years that have passed, it has grown even more and new topics are added. What are the priorities for Norway? When you now enter the Security Council, what are the key topics within the broader Women, Peace and Security agenda that you would put special emphasis on?
Well, if there is one key word that I think could, in a way, sum up our Women, Peace and Security agenda for the Council, with, as I mentioned, 3 of the 4 main priorities has to do with it, it is about inclusion. Yeah. Inclusion is, I think, the only wise thing to do, because we know that if peace processes are to be sustainable, if they are to actually make the best possible benefit of the society in which it shall work, you have to have women along. And that is not because women are, as I mentioned, always victims or that women are the weaker part. On the contrary, I would say that in so many cases we see that when women take action, civil society organizations, mediators networks, and others who can actually play a role, then you suddenly have a very, very different angle to a peace process. So inclusion is the key word, and also inclusion in a meaningful way. As I mentioned it at the outset, I very often get provoked when I hear that in a certain negotiation or a discussion, the men around the table are more or less generous if they offer a seat for a woman. That is not inclusion. Inclusion is about laying out the foundation, the premises. What are we discussing? What kind of results do we want and need as women? How are our needs taken into consideration, just as men's needs are? And I think the best way to sum it up is the, well, quite famous words of Leymah Gbowee when she said that, well, women are not observers to conflict. Why should we be observers to peace? And I think that sums it up in a good way. That if you include women, you get much better peace processes. The chance of success is bigger. The chance of viability is greater. And the chance of this trickling down into society is, in my opinion, much, much stronger. And we see it also from research, and your research being part of that.
Margot Wallström, I was thinking, based on your experience now from the Security Council and all your years as foreign minister with the feminist foreign policy, what kind of advice would you like to give Eriksen Søreide and Norwegian diplomats when they are now preparing for the Security Council period?
Well, actually, I don't think Ina needs any advice. I think we need to continue to cooperate. And I think it was a great idea to have somebody from Norway embedded into, and we didn't want to send them back, afterwards, because they are so good. And I think we should continue with that, to sometimes borrow somebody from a neighboring country's MFA to us. No, I think we've given all the examples of our experience and maybe some advice from that point of view. You know the drill by now. And then, well, you have to make room for the unexpected, because there will be a crisis or something that you have never seen before. So just think about that. It will take time, and it will take a lot of energy also to work on those things. And the rest, really, we have very much the same view on the working methods. I think that what happened with Resolution 1325 is that it brought women into sort of the mainstream discourse about peace and security. And we also understand better, with the help of that resolution, sort of the gendered aspects of peace and security. And also we have common language to discuss them. But actually, if we look at the results, they are rather depressing. And especially this part of 1325, because it had 4 pillars. It had conflict prevention, protection of women and girls, women's participation in peacemaking and peace building, and relief and recovery. And when it comes to participation, we are still far from the target. And I think this is what needs to be looked at from now on. Women's participation. And I think if we set up clear targets for even numerical targets for women's participation in peacekeeping or what have you, then we have to make sure that we implement it and reach them. But so far the results are not good enough. And I also think one thing for the future is to make sure that we renew the national action plans, that we get all countries to actually make national action plans and update them so that they cover, for example, also the aspect of peace and security and climate, which is one thing that I don't think we have looked at enough. So these are just a couple of the things that, and maybe Norway will have to continue to ask raise their hand and ask the question, where are the women?
Well, I will then like to challenge you, Eriksen Søreide, because when Norway is leaving the Security Council at the end of 2022, obviously Sweden has already built a legacy. What kind of legacy would you like to see that Norway has left behind when you leave?
Well, I certainly do hope, and I also think that we have a fair chance of leaving the Security Council with a legacy that says something about how we're prioritized. Margot mentioned at the end peace and security versus climate. That is actually our 4th priority in the council work. And that also goes straight into the women, peace and security agenda, because women are very often disproportionately affected by the risks that comes with climate change to security. So I think that if we succeed in bringing more women to the table, if we succeed in alluding more women as the front runners in many of these processes, not only as backbenchers or a symbolic number, but actually front runners in many of these processes, if we are able to lead by example in how we compose delegations, how, as I talked about earlier on today, who we quote, who we take a picture of, that also has a huge symbolic value. And I do think that people in the Security Council and outside the Security Council expect from us that we will push this agenda forward. That also means that they expect that we will be annoying sometimes towards the other countries, and that's fine. We are fully prepared to play that role. But that is for us a very important task, to actually put strength behind our priorities and our work in the Council. We fully know, and I think Margot can tell us this better than anyone, we will not succeed in everything. We will at all not turn the Security Council upside down. But we do have something that gives us a possibility of doing more than many other countries can in prevention, in inclusion, in participation. And I think that when we look back at the Security Council term, I think we will probably have experienced more than once that something came along that we didn't expect. But I also think we will have experienced a very, very tough time in trying to push back the pushback on the normative agenda. So I think we will have to fight on two fronts. One is to implement what we have already decided, which we have a long way to go still before we can say that, yes, we're satisfied. But at the same time, we will have to fight the pushbacks, because we see increasingly that many countries, many of them permanent members of the Security Council, are the ones who are in the front of trying to weaken the language, undermining the resolution, and really not pushing the agenda forward. So 2 things, and we hope that we can set our mark and stamp on that.
Time is running fast when we are having fun. Louise, before we close, based on what you have been hearing now, are there any final remarks you would like to make, or any questions you would like to ask to the Foreign Minister and to Margot Wallström, briefly?
Very briefly, yeah. I think sort of a little bit tying up where I think you sort of been landing in towards the end. So if we look back before, now let us look forward. So this month we've seen a lot of different celebrations with the 20th anniversary. And as you have also touched on, we've also seen the battle lines starting to be drawn where the resistance is. And unfortunately, I think those are exactly around implementation, because that's now where we're all focusing. Hopefully, with last week's results, we don't have to mention where, maybe we got some more capital backing in dealing with that. But at the same time, I don't think we've ever also seen so much mobilization in so many states that are becoming clear and actually putting political capital behind WPS. So if you were to, Margot and Ine, if you were to really focus on one key outcome or takeaway from this 20th anniversary that you think will be the thing that will create momentum for the coming, let's not say 20 years, but at least say 2-3 years, what would you say is the main takeaway for you and for you, Margot? If you could just sum that up very briefly as an endpoint.
Would you like to start?
Well, Margot can start if she likes to.
Would you like to start, Margot?
I'm just reflecting on that question, because we've heard so many big words about 1325, and still, I mean, women are no safer in war and conflict. There are so few of these peace deals that include women, and so it's just the difference between words and deeds. So I would like to see more of turning this into deeds. I am also more hopeful now, because I think with the change of the American president and the leadership from the American side, life will be easier also in the Security Council. A little bit easier in the Security Council. And then nobody will do it for us, as you said. I mean, we will just have to, we have to work hard from now on. We will have to make sure that there are proper plans also, for example, national action plans to back this up. And I can only say that I wish you all the best in the Security Council, and I'm sure that you will do a marvelous job, and how much I've enjoyed working with you and also seeing your plans. And I think it's also a very laudable agenda that you have and those priorities. So if we can just see some small moves in the right direction, that will be really good.
Well, I would just like to very quickly add that I think some of the main pillars that I think will be important in the years to come is to not only include and reach out to like-minded countries, because that will be a too narrow group. So we have to reach out to countries where we don't always agree on everything, but where we can find common ground on this. And secondly, again, implementation. Guterres said not long ago that it's quite amazing that the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and 1325 is something that everyone agrees on, but it meets such a resistance on the ground. And that has to do with implementation. So those two factors, I think, will be important.
On that note, I am afraid that we have to close now. We have come to the end. I would like to thank you once again, Margot Wallström, for taking time to joining us from your home. And thank you, Minister Eriksen Søreide, for joining us. And thank you, Louise, for sharing your reflections from your research project. I would like to remind you all watching that this is not the end to the national commemoration here in Norway of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. We have a full week ahead of us of webinars. And when we now close, you will see on your screen a QR code which will give you access to an overview of all these webinars. So thank you all for watching and stay safe.